Welcome to the webinar on the semantics component of structured literacy. Welcome to the webinar on the semantics component of structured literacy. This webinar is one of several developed for the Kansas Teaching and Learning Project and to support Kansas educators in the understanding and instruction of structured literacy. My name is Stephanie Stint, and it's my pleasure to talk through this topic with you today. I am a District Alignment Specialist for the Kansas MTSS and Alignment Project, and I've also served as a Reading Specialist for the Kansas MTSS team, and I'm also a Certified Letters Facilitator. You will see my contact information there at the bottom of the slide. We have just two objectives today. I will provide some background on the importance of teaching semantics, and particularly vocabulary, as part of the structured literacy framework, and introduce you to a few instructional strategies and activities that are supported by research to help students develop and deepen their knowledge of word meanings. First, let's look at why semantics is part of the structured literacy framework, and why it's so important to teach students the meanings of words and phrases, as well as how to get meaning from words they don't know. One thing I want to point out is that the term vocabulary and semantics are not synonymous. These two concepts are closely related, but vocabulary is the knowledge of and memory for word meanings, while semantics is all about depth of understanding known words. With semantics, we go deeper into exploring relationships and differences of meaning of words so that students can effectively use those words in their speaking and writing. This graphic is known as Scarborough's rope or the reading rope. And it's a model that can help us understand why semantics and vocabulary are a crucial component of being a proficient reader. We know that skilled reading is a product of both word recognition and language comprehension, and that these two major domains contain specific reading skills or sub-skills within them that we need to be proficient readers. These reading skills are represented on the graphic as strands of a rope that show us what fluent and skilled reading is comprised of. Being skilled at one domain or one strand does not compensate for weaknesses in the other strands. All of them are necessary to become a skilled reader. Likewise, if there's a weakness in one or more of the strands, reading comprehension is going to be compromised. At the word recognition level, readers must be able to accurately and automatically read each word. But in order to comprehend what's being read, the reader must also be able to attach meanings to those words, which is represented at the language comprehension level of the rope. So you can see how these two strands are woven together over time for skilled, proficient reading to occur and are dependent on one another. Through research, we also know that there's a reciprocal relationship between vocabulary knowledge and text comprehension, and that vocabulary is highly predictive of later reading comprehension. In fact, the first bullet mentions vocabulary knowledge in grade 1 is predictive of how well students comprehend written text in high school. These statistics show us that there's a very high correlation between knowledge of individual word meanings and our ability to comprehend a text, and vocabulary accounts for over half of the impact on reading comprehension. In connecting this model to structured literacy, the IDA has defined semantics as the aspect of language concerned with meaning. Meaning is conveyed both by single words and by phrases and sentences. Comprehension of both oral and written language is developed by teaching word meanings, vocabulary, interpretation of phrases and sentences, and understanding the text organization. Semantics becomes a critical component of teaching the structure of the language system. Semantics includes understanding each of these: meanings of individual words and morphemes, figurative language, how to use context to determine the meaning of a word, shades of meanings of words, and connotation and denotation of words. And we're going to talk about all of most of those today. So how do children achieve knowledge of words and their meanings? The National Reading Panel found that vocabulary should be taught both directly and indirectly. Direct instruction means teaching specific words, such as pre-teaching vocabulary prior to a reading selection. However, it's estimated that from 3rd grade on, students must encounter and learn between 2,000 and 3,000 new word meanings a year to keep pace with the expected levels of vocabulary growth. Obviously, there's a limit to how many words you can teach individually, as that's time-consuming. Much of that word learning must occur informally through indirect encounters with words, by reading, being read to, and being exposed to lots of new words. And finally, both breadth and depth of word knowledge are important for reading comprehension. They both contribute to reading achievement. Quality vocabulary instruction should include developing surface learning of many words and being able to recognize many words, which is the breadth, and a deeper understanding of fewer words, such as their multiple meanings, shades of meanings, more complete definitions. When we talk about vocabulary instruction, research tells us that it must be explicit. When we teach words explicitly, what we do is we carefully select a few words that we will directly teach to students by using a student-friendly definition, its proper use within a sentence, and a discussion around examples and non-examples of the word. Vocabulary instruction must also include multiple opportunities to practice the word's use, because we don't learn word meanings through one exposure. Although we might remember it temporarily or for a short time, in order for the word's meaning to be stored in our long-term memory, we must give students many chances to practice the word's meaning over time and provide follow-up review. These opportunities are more effective when they're engaging and students are actively participating in the learning of new words. And they get an opportunity to explore their relationships among other words instead of just rote memorization of definitions. And finally, vocabulary should be taught school-wide and across all content areas. Vocabulary instruction should not be isolated to reading or ELA class. Since we know that vocabulary is critical to reading comprehension, subject area teachers should teach the vocabulary that's unique to their content area, as well as grade-appropriate general academic vocabulary. So I'm going to talk about the explicit instruction of words. The National Reading Panel summarized the strong evidence on the effectiveness of explicitly teaching students the meanings of specific words. We're going to talk about the instructional routine that can be utilized for this, as well as suggestions for helping students build networks among words they know and do not know. So first, how do we select words we actually need to teach directly? So as mentioned before, we can't possibly teach every word a student will need to learn. Instructional time is precious, and we must select those target words carefully. When previewing a selection for target words and thinking about what words might get in the way of comprehension, Beck and colleagues suggest considering how useful is the word, how often will the students see it in other texts, and high utility words, or words that they're likely to see in other areas and that students will encounter a lot, should be given consideration for that direct instruction. Also, how does the word relate to other words, concepts, and ideas that they've been learning through the curriculum? In other words, does the word relate to what the students are studying? And finally, how important is the word to understanding of the text? And these may be words that are important for understanding the main ideas or the main concepts of the text or the reading selection. Try to teach at least 3 to 5 words per reading selection. Beck and colleagues recommend trying to teach at least 400 words a year through systematic, explicit instruction with multiple exposures and opportunities to practice. Beck and colleagues have also recommended a categorization of words into 3 levels or tiers, and this can be helpful when selecting which words to teach in depth. These are not to be confused with tiers that are used when referring to intervention and MTSS models, but they do give us an outline for how to identify which words would be good for in-depth explicit instruction. Tier 1 words are those common basic words that students are likely to learn through their normal language development over time. These words rarely will need explicit instruction, but sometimes even Tier 1 words need to be explicitly taught to, for example, more at-risk readers, or ELs. Tier 2 words are those words that are used with high frequency that students will encounter across several subject areas, several domains, and they are central to the meaning of the text. You could see some examples there. These are words that you will focus on for explicit instruction with repeated exposure. And Tier 3 words are low frequency. They're very specialized. They're very focused on a specific domain. These are words that you might teach as the need arises, but often these words already have supports in the text or a definition right after the word. For example, a text might read, photosynthesis is the process in which light energy is converted to chemical energy in the form of sugars. So in this case, it wouldn't be necessary to explicitly teach the word because the text has already defined it. Once you've selected the words for a reading selection, you can introduce the words through an explicit vocabulary routine. So this is a simple and a sample routine adapted from Beck and Archer. Take a moment to review the steps of this vocabulary routine. In step 1, the teacher just states the word, and you may also want to write it on the board and read it to the class. You may also consider pronouncing the word by syllables or exploring the prefixes, suffixes, and or roots if it has those morphemes within that, so students can better identify the structure of the word. In step 3, it's important to give the students a student-friendly definition of the word. The definition should use everyday language and be easy to understand. While dictionaries can be valuable reference tools when students know how to use them, memorizing dictionary definitions or copying definitions from the dictionary are not recommended for explicit vocabulary instruction because there's limitations to dictionary definitions. They're oftentimes complex and densely worded, and they may contain words that students don't understand. In step 4, you'll use the word in several contexts so that students can begin to determine the attributes of the word. And step 5 goes even further. It's not enough to provide students with that student-friendly definition. They also need to know what are the parameters around what the word is and what the word is not. When providing examples, if possible, you can act them out, provide like physical, concrete examples, or display a visual or a graphic. And use the word several times while giving examples of its use and saying what it is and is not. In step 6, you begin to check the students' understanding by asking them to come up with their own sentences by using the word in context. Maybe you'd have them partner up and use an example of that word in a sentence with one another. And in step 7, you'll be checking their understanding by asking yes/no questions and having them explain why they agree or they don't agree with the statement. So we're going to use an example of acquire. So I might say as the teacher, the word is acquire. What's the word? Acquire. We pronounce it acquire. Say the word again. Acquire. How many syllables does acquire have? 2. Do you hear the schwa sound in the first syllable? And then I'm going to move into the student-friendly definition. Acquire means to buy or get something. If you buy a new video game, you acquire it. If you got something new, you would acquire it. So acquire means to get or buy something. In 1803, the United States was able to purchase the Louisiana Territory. They were able to acquire that piece of land from France. Another example, my favorite football team will acquire 3 new players this year. I would need a great deal of money to acquire a valuable painting. You might acquire a large vocabulary from being read to and reading a lot. And for the next step, students might have yes or no cards that they could actually show you. Students will need to distinguish when is the appropriate use of the word. So here's an example. Karen was able to get 2 tickets to the game on Saturday. Did she acquire them? And the students would say yes or no. If I lost my library book, did I acquire it? No, because to acquire something means to get it or buy it, and I actually lost it. If I lend someone money, do I acquire money? No. Tell your partner why you do not acquire money if you lend it to someone. And finally, to check for understanding, you can have pairs of students share sentences with one another using acquire in a sentence, or follow up with questions they can respond to orally or in writing. The 4-square concept map, and you may have also heard it called a Freyer model, is a graphic organizer that can be used when you're explicitly teaching vocabulary, words, and concepts. This graphic allows teachers to incorporate the elements of vocabulary instruction, many of them that we just talked about, into a graphic such as this. It also enables readers to understand attributes of words and relationships between concepts or word structure, and it can be used in any grade level or subject matter. After words are introduced, they should be revisited through both speaking and writing activities. As I said before, multiple opportunities to practice words is necessary for students to own the words for speaking and writing. Students will not be able to remember the words and their meanings if they are just given one exposure. And as I said earlier, the best kinds of practice are those that emphasize relationships among words and building an understanding between what is known and what is new. So in a sense, relationships between words help the new words stick to what the students already know. If a student can connect an existing word to prior knowledge, they're more likely to remember it. So semantic mapping is a research-based tool that can be used to help build these connections between known and unknown words. In addition to helping students build connections, it's also an engaging activity. It can be done in groups, and it promotes rich discussion about words. So first, the teacher selects a concept word, and they write it in the middle of a piece of paper or the board. And then students brainstorm words that are associated with that target word, and can be done with the whole class or in groups. And once you get a sufficient number of words compiled from the initial brainstorming stage, you can have students make connections among the words and begin to identify and categories for the groups of words. And sometimes the brainstorm word might not fit within a category and is an outlier. Sometimes the words the students have already generated become the title or the category name itself. Sometimes they need to generate their own category name. And the students discuss they can add more words to the categories as they come up with more words during those group discussions. Now, a semantic map is usually done before reading, and it is particularly useful in content areas. And you can keep revisiting it after reading, and then have the students make revisions and additions as needed. And again, it's very interactive, and discussion should be encouraged throughout the whole semantic mapping process, because students can actually learn from one another and clarify their understanding as they approach a word with their own prior knowledge. Another thing to keep in mind is that there will be students who may not have been exposed to a lot of words and phrases, or they are English learners who are not familiar with or understand figurative language that is used prevalently in our language. For example, idioms such as "I'm in a pickle," "I have bigger fish to fry," or "walk on eggshells" need to be directly and explicitly explained to students if figurative language is a challenge, because that would interfere with their comprehension. And one strategy to use with students is to have them illustrate the literal meaning of the phrase within the phrase. For example, students will learn that giving someone the cold shoulder came from the 1800s, when welcome visitors to a house were actually served a hot meal, but those who were not welcome, they would be given a cold shoulder of whatever meat was being eaten, which would discourage them from staying a long time. So students often enjoy hearing the backstory about how some of our phrases came to be. Now, it is estimated that from third grade on, as I said before, students must learn the meanings of 2,000 to 3,000 new words a year to keep up with their vocabulary growth yearly. And since we can only teach so many words explicitly, we need to rely on independent word learning strategies for students to learn meanings of words that they don't know. And one way of teaching students independent learning word strategies is to teach them that words are made up of word parts. And analyzing the parts of those words can help us get an idea for the meaning of the word. Compound words are one of the earliest and easiest ways to begin analyzing words. because students can see how two words come together and form a new word, and then analyze the meanings of those individual word parts to get the meaning of the whole word, like in sandbox. Once students get older, a major way for students to figure out what words mean is through analyzing what we call morphemes. And morphemes are the smallest unit of meaning in a word. And those are prefixes, suffixes, roots. And then applying their knowledge of those morphemes to multisyllabic words, like bilateral. Students are better readers, have a better understanding of those morphemes and how to apply them. So it's not enough just to memorize the prefixes, suffixes, and words and their meanings, but actually the application of those. So in the bilateral example, you would teach that the Latin word, or the Latin root lat, means side, and the suffix al means pertaining to or having, and the prefix bi means to. So putting the morphemes together, you can figure out that bilateral means having two sides, and then put the word back into a sentence and see if that makes sense. So it's important to understand that when we teach students how to analyze words with morphemes, that we actually use that as a cognitive strategy, just not a list of rules to memorize. The strategy must be taught, explicitly modeled several times, and allowed students adequate practice. So the strategy itself is students will recognize that they don't know the word, then they analyze the word for morphemes that they recognize, and they hypothesize the meaning of the word based on the word parts like we did with bilateral, and then check the hypothesis with the context. Now, since words can have a variety of meanings, subtle differences in meanings can be related to each other in multiple ways. And it's important that teaching students about these similarities and differences between words, these subtle differences, can deepen their understanding of words and enhance the building of connections between what is known and what's not known in their vocabulary. In our language, we know that there's many words that have more than one meaning. And even in very beginning reading instruction, there's a lot of times when we could point out that there are words that students are exposed to that have more than one meaning, such as foot, gum, jam, bill. So you could use a simple graphic organizer like this one, where you just write the word in the center, and then one unique meaning for the word in each of the boxes, and include an example sentence in each of those boxes as well. And multiple meaning words also provide an opportunity, a fun opportunity for learning words. And research actually supports using what's called wordplay in the classroom. So think about using puns and jokes and cartoons to help students to reflect on the meanings of words and to become active learners in constructing meaning and reinforce the understanding of multiple meanings. So in these examples, students would have to know appendix has more than one meaning, and so does the word pick. Semantics also includes the understanding of connotations and denotations of words that are synonyms, as there are slight differences in the meanings depending on our association with those words. So just quickly, denotation is the actual literal dictionary definition of a word. And all of the words on your screen literally mean a set of more than one person. However, each one of them has a slightly different connotation. And connotation is the emotional connection we make with the word, or the cultural association with the word. So if we look at these words on your screen, the word group is pretty neutral in terms of connotation. It simply means a number of people. Now, clique also means a number of people, but it typically has a negative connotation because it implies we're excluding others into our group. And gang is also a number of people, but it has a negative connotation because it suggests violence or criminals. And club, again, that's a group of people, but it has a more positive connotation because it's a group of people that meet to participate in a similar interest or activity. And Baldwin, Ford, and Redens actually suggest a method of using feature analysis that utilizes a thesaurus. They suggest that teachers discuss the connotative differences between synonyms by presenting the words in a sentence frame. And so you can see that I've used each of those words we just discussed in the same sentence frame. And the teacher can discuss the differences they notice between and among the meanings as they read and discuss the sentences about which ones are more acceptable and which ones are not. And once students understand the denotative meanings of the words, the teacher and students together can create a semantic feature matrix, like what we see here. And so you can discuss the unique attributes that may be slightly different among those terms and have students explain their thinking. Again, this strategy is helpful in just reinforcing those connections, those relationships among very similar words, but have those subtle, slight differences to have kind of a deeper understanding of those words and their meanings. Scaling is another technique for helping students refine their knowledge of word meanings. The teacher will select a pair of words that are antonyms, or basically opposites, and places them on opposite ends of the continuum. And then students brainstorm their own words to add to the continuum. And it can be anywhere between these two words or even outside of the two words. And students will have to justify their reasoning for placing the words where they do, or even write sentences using the words. And if you're scaffolding this for students, a teacher can generate example words, and students can actually rearrange them on a scale such as this. And again, this is an interactive activity, emphasizes relationships, and provides an opportunity for rich discussion. As we wrap up our module on semantics, keep in mind building and district leaders also have a responsibility in ensuring an environment where all students are learning and achieving. And one thing that leadership should do is to ensure there's adequate time for collaboration scheduled within the school day. Collaboration can focus on a variety of topics, but this is a time when teachers can discuss how they are emphasizing vocabulary, which vocabulary strategies they are using, and get support from others about which words are being targeted for instruction. Leaders should also ensure necessary professional development is planned to improve reading instruction. Learning walks or walkthroughs should also be conducted so that there's a sense of how the new strategies are being utilized and connected to what other additional professional development is needed. And finally, there should be opportunities, obviously, for students to learn and use new vocabulary throughout the day and outside of the classroom. In this module, we have discussed the rationale for teaching semantics as well as several instructional strategies. I would encourage you to try some of the activities, strategies, and techniques you heard today. First, evaluate your current vocabulary instruction and your instruction around semantics and see where some of these practices could fit within your current instruction and what practices you might change or improve. Select 3 to 5 vocabulary words from a reading selection that you would like to explicitly teach. Dedicate instructional time to teaching those words and practice using that sample instructional routine. And then also plan on how you're going to provide multiple exposures to and practice of those words. And try to teach around 10 to 12 words a week. Practice is most effective when it is extended over a period of time. And please use the link that accompanies this webinar to access the slides, the supplemental handouts, and the quiz. And thanks for joining me today to learn more about the teaching of semantics.